Good morning, Sangha. The last Dharma talk I gave, Sensei Dave challenged me to do it without notes. So challenge accepted. The universe has been talking to me. It's been showing me signs. And the last Dharma talk I did, I talked about how I realized that I kind of hid away a part of my life, the law enforcement part of my life. Some of you may know that I am a mental health counselor, but before that, I was in law enforcement for about 10 years. And then when I got out of law enforcement, I met my ex-husband. He was a physician, and I left that life behind, didn't look back. But the body keeps score. And the dirty little secret is, although I left that life of law enforcement and moved into a life of being a physician's wife, but the dirty little secret is the physician I met him while I was scooping out bullets from a chest cavity. So moving on and, trying to, actually not even trying, really subconsciously putting that part of my life away in a, deep, dark, hidden from my subconscious, not thinking about it. So this Dharma talk for me is going into that deep, dark place and meeting the blue dragon. So I dedicate this talk to first responders and my brothers and sisters in law enforcement. So with that being said, you're going to see my Dharma practice in action because the body keeps score. And so I just want to tell you a little bit about like what it is to be a first responder and how that affects your life. And so I want to go through the ugly stuff, the hard stuff, so we can get to the good stuff, because isn't that how life often is? You got to go through the hard stuff to get to the good stuff. So in law enforcement and any first responders, firefighters, emergency medical technicians, law enforcement, they're the first on scene to everyone's most tragic, disastrous incident. So you are charged with being the solution to everyone else's problem. And you're also going into situations you have no freaking idea what's going to happen. What that does to your nervous system is it puts you in a sympathetic nervous system state quite often, because you don't know what you're getting into. You're there, you're supposed to be the one in control. You're supposed to be the calm in the storm, figuring problems out and helping people in their most urgent time of need. And I would ask you to think about, have you ever dialed 911? Or do you ever know anyone that has ever had to dial 911? And like, what was happening at that moment that you had to dial 911? So when I was in law enforcement, I started out as a road officer, and then I became a field training officer where it was my job to train rookies. I became known as the hatchet woman because I took very seriously training, because whoever I was training, I knew was going to be interacting with the public. And also, if you're my backup, my 1094, and you're showing up on scene and you're making the scene more dangerous for me and everybody else, you're not going to pass. You're not going to have a job. And that was my standard. While I give this talk, I might have some kind of somatic sensations because the body keeps score. So if my voice gets jittery, if I start crying, if stuff starts happening, I'm okay. I'm really okay. It's just like people who have been to war. If you bring up those memories, the body remembers, the body wants to act. So, so that's why I talk about this today. When you're a first responder, you go from call to call to call and not knowing what you're getting into. You can go to a call where, a father has just decided to take out his whole family and himself. And then, you deal with that. And then your next call might be a horrific child abuse, or, somebody disemboweled, or, somebody needs to go to jail because whatever they've done. So you can see the nervous system activated, 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 activated. This also causes inflammation. When you're in a sympathetic state, that is inflammatory. When you're in a parasympathetic state, like we as Buddhists enjoy quite frequently, that's anti-inflammation, that's calm, that's focused, that's clear thinking, that's accepting what the present moment is showing us and then acting upon it. So part of what we do as Buddhists is we bear witness. And so this is me bearing witness to my brothers and sisters in law enforcement and firefighters and emergency medical technicians. Because as I will get to, there are issues. So you go from call to call to call, and you're dealing with other people's most horrific, barbaric, unsafe, violent, volatile situations. And at least for me and for my friends in law enforcement, we weren't processing that in between. It was just our job, it's our job. And so if you think of stress, and you think of a glass, and you're pouring stress in the glass, and you're pouring stress in the glass, well, if you're not doing something to empty that out a little bit, it's going to overflow. And it does. And like the feelings I was talking about, like if I start to feel jittery, or if, start to feel anxiety or something like that, first responders are feeling that and oftentimes accepting that as the norm, which causes so many health issues later, not to mention mental health issues. So the reality is there can be triggers everywhere, and it can be a trigger as simple as a blue bathroom tile that you're least expecting. You're going about your life, enjoying your day, And it could be, oh, that blue bathroom tile brings me back to that horrific scene that I dealt with. And, so, but it's my Zen practice that brings me back to center, that reminds me, okay, that sensation you're feeling in your body, that's your body thinking it needs to react again because that memory has been triggered. It is my Zen practice that gives me the distance to, instead of feeling those sensations and maybe having an outburst or lashing out or something like that, it's my Zen practice that brings the awareness to it, that gives me the space to be able to say, okay, your body is thinking it's back there, back then. It's thinking it needs to react. So this all creates kind of an environment where first responders often feel safer around other first responders, because when you've seen so much, when you've dealt with so much, the general population doesn't really get it unless you've lived it, unless you've experienced it, unless you've, had to deal with this horrific event, try to get your shit together and then go to the other horrific event. You really don't get it. And then you got to go home and deal with your family, right? Seeing, I try not to get too graphic because it scares people. So, but the reality is your nervous system, and you're seeing these things that researchers now find first responders have so many similarities to military that have been in war. The difference is when you're in war, you're in war. You're in war and you're there. But first responders, they're doing it 8, 10, 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, over years. So the impact of that is just like if you've been to war. For a long time, this wasn't studied. For a long time, nothing was done about, or not nothing was done about it, but we really didn't know, because you got to be tough. You got to do it, you're the one that they're calling to help them. You've got to stand up. You've got to handle the situation at hand. But we're researching and we're finding the impacts of this stuff. So, like I said, I put this away for a really long time. And it was my Zen practice that made me realize that I stuffed it away deep in that cave with that blue dragon. But realizing what it has done to me, what that level of acute and chronic stress has done to my body and my psyche and my whole being and my perspective over all of these years, gives me so much damn compassion for the first responders out there. So a couple of weeks ago, there was a race going on here, and at the end of the street there was a deputy assigned, doing traffic. Well, she and I got to talking. I told her, I'm retired law enforcement, blah, blah, blah. We started talking, and she started telling me about her boyfriend is down the street guarding that, intersection, and how traumatized he is and how he cannot let a call go. Like when he's at a call, he will bring that to the next call. He will bring that stress to the next call and carries it around with him all day long. So you can imagine if you're dealing with this, and if you're living with this, and if this is your life, you're chronically being exposed to this sympathetic nervous state where you're very inflamed and ready to act, it takes a toll. And it is also, in a way, very isolating because you're surrounding yourself with other first responders because that's safe. They get it. You know, you can be your authentic self and you're not going to scare them, you know, because they've got all the other, they've seen this stuff too. But you find yourself trying to have lunch with the ladies or, you know, the moms from school, and it's weird. It's uncomfortable because, you know, people often really can't relate. So you find yourself trying to fit in, kind of feeling like you don't. So what research has showed us recently is that first responders have a higher rate of diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, depression, anxiety, PTSD, and suicidality. They also have a higher rate of immunodiseases because stress can trigger immunodiseases. Well, folks, I was diagnosed with 3 different immune diseases by the time I was 30. And like I have admitted to all of you before, I have been in the bathtub on occasions with a gun to my head. So there was that deputy that I met, and, you know, she was really, I've been wanting to help first responders for a while now, but this cave, you know, this dragon, oh, that's the big ugly for me, you know, that's my baggage. That's one of the most sensitive things we could ever do. But here I am because of my practice. So I've been wanting to do something about it, and things have been motivating me. A friend of mine, could you show that picture? A friend of mine that I went to one of the academies I went to with shared this picture on social media the other day. And I hope you can see it. It's a law enforcement officer with his head in his hands. And it says, "I wish my mind could forget what my eyes have seen." And that was just last week that he shared that. And at that moment, I said, that's it. I'm doing it. I'm making it happen. I'm creating a program. Going to treat first responders. Going to bring some Zen to first responders. So I have created a program. I'm still finishing up the final touches, but I'm creating a program. It is called First Responder Zen. And it is specifically to help our first responder community. Research shows that first responders are hesitant to get help on these issues, especially law enforcement. But we have a crisis on our hands because a few years ago, the government did a study on suicidality in the general population because it's increasing. What they found was one of the risk factors of suicidality is occupation, specifically first responders. It is a risk factor. And among first responders, those with prior military have a higher rate of suicidality. And among first responders, law enforcement officers have the highest rate of suicidality among any other decedent with a job that had a profession. Law enforcement officers are 54 times more likely to commit suicide than any other decedent that had an occupation. So there's a need. And I see my brothers and sisters suffering. I was only in it for about 10 years. And I'm sure my family and my friends can tell you, don't ever sneak up on me. To this day, when I walk into a room, I'm looking where the exits are. I'm looking at everyone in the room. I'm looking to see what's in their hands. And I'm trying to position myself against a wall to this day. To this last week, I was at Disney World with my daughter. And something happened. It was busy. Somebody there, kind of made some aggressive action backwards at me. Well, without even realizing what I was doing, I went into a complete body block, and this kind of stuff happens around me. If I hear gunshots, I'm dropping to the ground, I'm getting prone. If body blocks come up, don't sneak up on me. Jose has done that once. So the body remembers. The body remembers. This is stuff you don't have to think about. Just like a professional baseball player, and they're swinging the bat. They're not thinking about swinging the bat. They've done it so many times, it's natural. That's what happens when you're a first responder. There's one time I was in Key West and I was in a cute little sundress and I saw a guy hitting a woman in the front seat of the car. There I am in my sundress, opening his door and grabbing him and getting him out of the car. So don't really do that anymore. I will call 911. But the thing is, you're so trained to react. Everything in your body, react. Problem, solve it. Threat, handle it. And the body remembers. But the thing is, we're not always under threat, and sometimes the body can get confused and think you are always under threat. And that's how first responders suffer. And that's how they have higher risks of all these illnesses and suicidality. But the thing is about first responders is they often don't want to talk to a typical therapist or anyone in house because they don't want to be unfit for duty or declared unfit for duty. So there's this kind of stigma where you need help, you might want help, but you're afraid to get help because you want the stigma. So this group I'm creating and bringing to first responders, I hope, because I can relate, I'm hoping that I will be more effective in helping them. What else? I'm not using any notes, so. Oh, so I love this indigenous philosophy, the way they think of plants and, trees and stuff like that. If you want to keep a plant, you give it attention. If you don't want to keep a plant, you ignore it. That's the same thing about our wellness. And there's another photo I just want Dave to show because This photo stayed in my patrol car and on my desk when I was a detective. And it is something I trained my rookies with. As long as you have a breath in your body, you never give up. Never, ever, ever, never give up. And I'm 5'4". I was smaller back then. There were situations where my life was definitely in jeopardy. And I can tell you, there's something called 1033 traffic. 1033 traffic is it's a 10 code for first responders, specifically law enforcement. 1033 traffic is on your radio. When you go to 1033 traffic, that means that one of our brothers and sisters is in such dire straits that they can't get to their radio. So the radio becomes this beep, beep, beep. When you realize that that traffic is for you because you're so busy fighting for your life so that you can get home to your family, give me goosebumps. Those are the things. You are facing a life or death situation. Not once, not twice, over and over again, whether it's yours or you're witnessing somebody else losing their life or whatever traumatic, mutilating, horrific experience it is. First responders are experiencing it through others as well. So my brothers and sisters in law enforcement and all my first responder brothers and sisters, I see you. I hear the call for backup. I'm organizing a plan, and it's my mission to help